Let's get the view now of political analyst, policy expert as well, Sanusha Naidoo, who's joining us tonight on News at Prime. Sanusha, very good evening to you. So, split opinion, shall we say, on whether or not this route, where the panel will now investigate the accuracy or veracity of these claims, is the best way to go about handling this matter, is it?
Good evening to Mikili and good evening to the viewers. I think you are right, and just as the analyst from ISS has pointed out, I mean, it creates this level of doubt in a sense that if this is all according to legislation, according to the NCACC, according to the oversight that you're supposed to actually employ with regard to this whole situation regarding the vessel and regarding its docking and what was offloaded and unloaded onto the vessel, I think it would have been an easy task for the president to be able to say, I have the evidence. This is where I can point you towards this. But setting up a commission of inquiry suggests two things to me. One, that the president is not in the know, that he hasn't been able to keep his finger on the pulse with regard to what was going on. I don't know if it's a level of distrust between himself and the cabinet, but is this possibly a level of not having information or not having the right kind of information communicated to him? So it's a communication problem as well between himself and the cabinet and the relevant authorities that oversee these kinds of processes and procedures when it comes to this issue. So setting up a commission of inquiry is a bit, in my opinion, an easy way out, but it also can be a very, very difficult one, because a commission of inquiry can also, in terms of its reference, it can also open up issues that may not necessarily have been opened up before, and it can become a Pandora's box.
So if indeed there were South African arms supplied to Russia, whether by the government or by a third party, i.e. a party that had moved them, or a company, excuse me, that had moved them through a South African port, and no one in government, no one in cabinet knew, that would be damning nonetheless, would it not?
Absolutely. It sets you on a path of serious reputational risk. It sets you on a path of not being in control, not necessarily being able to have the relevant kind of intelligence, information at hand, knowing that this was going to happen or what was going to transpire. And it actually means that, in a sense, if a third party allegedly is involved in this whole debacle, then of course it raises another level of serious credibility issues and governance deficits for the South African state. And that just doesn't necessarily sit with the kind of issues that you need to be thinking about in your national interest and your national security interests.
The other problem, though, is if government had just straight off the bat said, as has already been said, there's no evidence that the country's government sold or supplied weapons for Russia to use in its invasion of Ukraine, people are likely, a great many people, it could be argued, would not have believed that statement off the bat because of that trust deficit that exists in the country at the moment between an elected government and its citizens.
Yeah, I think it's the social contract. I think the social contract has become irreconcilably broken. It cannot be recovered in the way that we see our relationship, or the citizens see their relationship to the state. There's a constant level of uncertainty and doubt about whether government is playing with a full deck of cards. And this is not necessarily because of this issue regarding the Lady R vessel. This has to do with a lot with the domestic issues that have become much more frightening for government, in a sense where it hasn't been able to pull back from the tipping point, in a sense, and be able to say to the citizens of the country with a lot of confidence that we are in control, we are governing, we are addressing issues. Just take, for example, the whole question of the cholera outbreak. Take, for example, the question of state capture. Take, for example, the questions of tender irregularities and other financial malfeasance that has happened in the country. And I think those domestic issues have become push and pull factors that are driving this level of lack of trust with the government. So even if there is nothing untoward that the Commission of Inquiry produces in terms of once it's gone through its various iterations and investigative processes, again, you still have that question of, this government is not necessarily one that has the trust, the confidence, and the credibility, and that is a very, very difficult one for them.
It'll also be important, will it not, for the Americans, the Russians, and even the Ukrainians to see whatever outcome, whatever process will be followed by this panel as legitimate, as credible, especially if South Africa and the rest of the other African states are going to be successful in their peace effort in the war.
Well, I take a slightly different stance on that. I think this is really about the question of the fact of the matter is a U.S. ambassador raised the specter on this, and then of course the response was the commission of inquiry. But the challenge here is that in this kind of situation, with this conflict that's deepening and entrenching itself in terms of the impact it's having on the divisive impact it's having on the global architecture, where countries are being compelled in certain ways to decide how they want to respond to this, but not necessarily given the options of an independent sovereignty. It becomes very complicated and complex. So I would say first and foremost the accountability is to the South African citizen and to the South African electorate and to the body politic of the state. However, whatever comes out of this, again, the challenge is that in this kind of environment that we find ourselves geopolitically, again, I think the situation here is the interpretation of how this conflict is being viewed, perceived, and what needs to be the ultimate outcome. So I think the challenge right now is that the system that we have as the international system built on this idea that we could have a peaceful solution, stability, etc., does not necessarily enable that, because the system is built for conflict, and it has to be that kind of reductionist approach where there has to be a winner and there has to be a loser. We've seen it in the 1919 context of the Treaty of Versailles. We've seen it after the Second World War. We've seen it at the end of the Cold War. So again, we're sitting with a very, very erratic international system where there has to be gatekeepers, and if the gatekeepers don't feel that a particular outcome is into their interest, then we end up in a complexity of challenges.
With that in mind then, Sanusha, how much do you think the global community is likely to care whatever outcome this panel produces?
Well, I think it would care in the sense that it would go back to the question of South Africa's credibility. It will go back to the question of the kind of Mandela-esque foreign policy that they quote in the 1993 article, but they quote certain sections of that around our role in terms of being a normative actor, in terms of the rules of law, the international law, our abidance by international conventions, and that we have, depending what the outcome is, they'll judge us on those dynamics and those criteria. But I think at the end of the day, again, some of those criteria that we're looking at in the international context is evolving as well, because it doesn't necessarily being applied in a way that's equal opportunity and equitable for everybody. It's being applied in levels in which it can be in the interest of some and not in the interest of others.
Sanusha Naidoo, pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much for your time.